So we are very glad to have Lucian Kim, who is an NPR correspondent in Moscow. Lucian, good evening. So our first question would be, really, all this recent escalation in Eastern Ukrainian front line, where it's in the Russian agenda? You know, how important it's there? Because, of course, in Kiev, it's a #1 topic, but obviously we are curious in the Russian reaction, in the official Russian reaction.
Well, on the one hand, you have the media coverage, and what's interesting is that in state media here in Russia, Ukraine has again become a topic since the weekend, and there's been a lot of coverage of what Russian state media call a civil war in Ukraine, and of course the conflict that's continuing is very sensitive here because sanctions or the lifting of sanctions depends on the outcome or at least the beginning of some kind of resolution in Donbass. As far as the level of where it is on the agenda, actually I would say that from the point of view of the Kremlin, Ukraine is quite low. The Kremlin doesn't necessarily want Donbass to be on any kind of agenda, especially on a larger international agenda. They would prefer to focus on other matters.
Lucian, I saw Oliver Carroll say something interesting on Twitter. He basically said that the media in Russia is attacking the OSCE, but they're not really bringing up the situation in Avdiivka. Did you notice that at all? Could you elaborate on that at all?
Well, what came to the notice of Russian journalists that were covering this conflict was that the OSCE was on the spot when Ukrainian tanks were seen in Avdiivka, and maybe I'm not familiar with the exact specifics of the timing when the OSCE made which report, but I think there might not have been an immediate reaction, and that's why Ukrainian state media jumped on that particular point.
On the topic of Donald Trump, he just had his phone call with Poroshenko. It was yesterday, I believe, or today. What did you make of the statement and the wording that came out of that phone call?
Well, I mean, what's interesting, of course, is the statement that came out of the White House talked about finding some resolution on the Russian-Ukrainian border. So obviously, some observers pointed out that the conflict isn't actually on the border between Ukraine and Russia, but actually further in the interior. And especially if you look on a map, Avdiivka is, of course, not very close to the Russian-Ukrainian border. Well, I noticed here, just looking at the way that Russian state media responded, almost the main point was that Russian state media noticed in the Ukrainian and in the White House readout of that phone call was that there was no mention of sanctions. Now, of course, the sanctions are an issue between Western countries and Russia and not directly involving Ukraine. So maybe that really wouldn't have been a topic anyway. But this is, as I mentioned, is really the sort of a very sensitive point for Russia, and that's why they were looking to see if there would be any further mention of sanctions.
And Lucian, of course, after Putin-Trump phone call, there were all kind of guesses about their relations, but also that, that Trump would be easier on Russia than the previous administration. But there was a number of attempts by the White House, by the State Department, to reconfirm their support towards Ukraine, and like by different kind of words. But it doesn't feel that it was really persuasive. So how it's seen, this kind of the fact that the U.S. officials try to, support Ukraine in different kind of statements, but does it really make Russians less confident, or like really change a bit their, opinion, as they had a bit of the bravado that, now with the new administration that would be easier than with the previous one?
Well, I think the main thing that's noticeable in just if you're looking at coverage in Russian state media in the last few weeks of the Obama administration, it really seemed like the gloves were off, and after Putin's big conference where he directly criticized the Obama administration and said the Democrats were more or less sore losers, and that's why they were going after Russia, and there was a really sort of unbridled criticism in state media. What I've noticed since the inauguration of Donald Trump is that the tone has changed completely. And although we did have, as you mentioned, there was some criticism. For example, the new U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, she did make a strong statement about the situation in Ukraine and Russia's role in it. The Russian state media are just reporting that, but there's not a lot of commentary about it. I think the idea is let's wait and see. Let's not really stick our neck out too much, and just wait and see what kind of policy is established. Especially, I think people are looking to see how the new Secretary of State Rex Tillerson deals with Russia, and of course. What everyone is expecting at some point is the long-awaited meeting between President Trump and President Putin.
Lucian, you mentioned that some things are confusing now, and one of the things that I think a lot of people find confusing is what is going on right now between Belarus and Russia? I mean, Lukashenko just had his 7-hour speech. What is the view from Moscow on what's going on there?
It's really quite interesting. Just to recap, maybe briefly, I mean, the president of Belarus came out on Friday and made some very strong statements against Russia. He criticized Russia for sort of going back on its word as far as oil imports and blocking agricultural products from being imported into Russia from Belarus. It was quite an extraordinary performance, and of course that comes in the wake of President Lukashenko quite surprisingly announcing that Russia or that Belarus would be loosening visa requirements for the citizens of 80 countries, which include the European Union and the U.S. So I don't think that was that loosening of the visa requirements, I think, was not necessarily seen with great joy in Moscow. I mean, we have to remember that formally Russia and Belarus are in one union together, and there are no border controls. So I do think Moscow was caught a little bit by surprise and didn't understand what kind of implications that would have for the border regime in Russia. What I found particularly interesting about Lukashenko's comments is that the Kremlin, within hours of this comment, the Kremlin released a statement on its website. And usually this doesn't happen. Usually the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, makes a comment to journalists, and this has been transmitted through the media. But in the case of Belarus, the Kremlin found it necessary within a few hours of President Lukashenko's comments to actually issue quite a long statement on the website, pointing out just exactly how much Belarus benefits from Russian subsidies. So again, this is the sort of the Belarusian factor is a surprise.